selective CB2 agonists are also being pursued because CB2 activation is very good for, it's very well known for its anti-inflammatory effects, and the CB2 receptor is upregulated when tissues are damaged. So giving a CB2 agonist in a situation where the receptor is upregulated is going to be beneficial to help bring about that anti-inflammatory effect. And there are several companies who are making CB2 selective agonists. Because CB2 is so expressed at such low levels in the brain, there isn't a psychotropic side effect associated with these compounds because there's really very little expression of CB2 in the brain. So at least from a CNS point of view, there's no central nervous system side effects of CB2 activation. So Corbus Pharmaceuticals have a CB2 agonist that they're looking at in a variety of different inflammatory autoimmune diseases, all of which are very unpronounceable. And Roche have a compound that they're looking for in inflammatory eye conditions. And Paphos Pharma have selective CB2 agonists that they're looking at in pain and inflammatory pain, because there is a role for CB2 activation in these areas as well. Even though we know CB1 is very good, CB2 is also good in inflammatory pain and peripheral pain. So that's what's out there at the moment in terms of pharmaceutical companies and the kinds of things that they are trying to develop in this space. If you look at clinicaltrials.gov, at the clinical trials registry, you can see that there are nearly 500 registered and active interventional trials that are looking at some kind of cannabis or cannabinoid-based product across the world. A world map of this shows you that an awful lot of this research is going on in North America, some in Europe, some in Australia, and the rest is kind of scattered around the globe. A lot of the countries that are kind of dominant in clinical research with cannabinoids tend to be those that have legalization for medicinal reasons, and especially those that have legalization for recreational reasons, because it's even less hard to carry out clinical research with cannabis-based products in those countries. And so they tend to lead the way in clinical research because of that normalization of cannabis products in those countries. If we look at the kind of stage, so those nearly 500 trials, a couple of things to point out. Firstly, that the majority of them are still phase 1, phase 2 studies, so early proof of concept studies, and then 155 of them are phase 3 and phase 4. And remember, these are the studies that are more likely to give us greater clinical confidence, because they're going to be studies in larger patient numbers. And so these are the ones that we're really looking at when we're trying to see what the future of cannabis-based medicines is going to be. The phase 1, phase 2 studies are not particularly associated with pharmaceutical companies. So at this stage, you get a lot of academic researchers doing clinical studies with cannabis-based compounds. So they are actually the majority of studies. 55% are not associated with pharma in the proof of principle type work. But then when you get to the phase 3 and 4, because of the massive significance and significant cost of these trials, you can see that the majority of them, nearly 3/4 of these trials, are associated with pharmaceutical companies looking at specific products that they are trying to get licensed and be able to claim back the money of the cost of these studies from the cost of selling the products. If we look at what kind of indications and what kind of drugs are being used at the phase 1 and phase 2, at the kind of early stage clinical phase, it's still a majority of pain studies. When you break them down by indication, you can see most of the work is being done in pain. And actually, interestingly, the next most common area of research is in illicit drug abuse and addiction. So, for example, cannabidiol, there's an awful lot of work going on to see whether or not cannabidiol could be used in substance abuse, because it seems to help with the withdrawal symptoms and to help with the addictive properties of other compounds. Then we've got psychotic disorders, then epilepsy, cancer-related symptoms, IBD, MS, PTSD, osteoarthritis. These are the most common indications for which we have phase 1 and 2 clinical work ongoing at the moment. And if you look at the molecules that are being assessed, predominantly this work is still looking at CBD and THC. So they are by far the most common compounds that are being trialed in phase 1 and phase 2. And then as you go down the list, we've got whole cannabis, we've got Sativex, we've got the FA inhibitors, we've got other CB1 receptor blockers, we've got PEA, CBDV. So there is a whole range of molecules that are being assessed, but still we continue to gather most data on CBD and THC. What about the phase 3 and 4? What the stuff that is most closest to maybe getting product approval? What does that tell us about the future of cannabis-based medicines, actually? Because if we start getting positive results in these registered phase 3 and phase 4 trials, that could really change our evidence base in the short-term future, because this is work that's currently ongoing. This is registered and active research that we're talking about here. So the first thing to point out is that CBD has a huge amount of phase 3 work ongoing, and this, as I've already mentioned, is really because the approval of Epidiolex in epilepsy has opened the floodgates in terms of looking at other forms of CBD in other forms of in epilepsy and other seizure disorders, but also looking at CBD in lots of different indications, because we can now say CBD is already a licensed product. We want to now pursue it in this different indication, in this slightly different formulation or delivery mechanism. So Epidiolex has done a huge amount for clinical research with CBD as a whole, and you can see there's a broad range of areas in which there are active phase 3 trials with CBD, including psychosis, endometriosis, other forms of epilepsy, not just childhood intractable epilepsy, pain of different pathological types, anxiety disorders, Rett syndrome, autism, schizophrenia, lots of work in substance abuse, Prader-Willi syndrome, alcohol abuse, Fragile X syndrome, and motor neuron disease. So positive data in any of these trials is really going to start changing the landscape for CBD in terms of having a much greater clinical confidence in what CBD can be used for. Then the next kind of most common compound that's being, a product that's being assessed is various ratios of CBD and THC. And it's not just in a 1-to-1 ratio. We've got lots of CBD dominant products, 20-to-1, 25-to-1, 50-to-1 type products that have a hint of THC in there. And these are being pursued in cancer for appetite stimulation, in Tourette syndrome, in multiple sclerosis, pain, and in HIV. And then we still have quite a lot of research with THC, just pure THC in phase 3 trials, more pain studies, cancer symptoms, and also anti-tumoral effects of cancer. Trichotillomania, which is a compulsive disorder where people pull out their hair. There's lots of behavioral type disorders that are becoming, there's interest in developing cannabis-based medicines in areas such as this, and OCD and Tourette syndrome. And THC is still being pursued in multiple sclerosis and in Parkinson's disease. So remember, this is phase 3 data, so nice big patient numbers, could be widening the indications for which THC products are licensed for. And then probably the least amount of research at phase 3 is in kind of whole cannabis plants. Again, remember, this is going to be primarily driven by the fact that companies who don't have IP on products and who aren't trying to develop a licensed product, who are able to sell their products, say, legally in the medicinal market, may not need to go to phase 3 trials or feel that they have the funding to go to phase 3 trials. So there are some, though. There is an epilepsy study, a motor neuron disease study, and a pain study looking at whole plant products at phase 3 that's currently registered at the moment. So in conclusion, in terms of the future of cannabis-based medicines, in my opinion, the future looks very bright, and I think that it's quite likely when you look at that clinical trial registry that in the short term we are going to have a much bigger evidence base for lots of indication. We're going to have a bigger evidence base for more types of molecules and more types of delivery mechanisms and formulations. So pharmaceutical development of cannabis-based medicines is really a massive industry, and it is projected to be worth billions in the short and medium term. There are numerous different compounds, formulations, and delivery mechanisms that are under development by many pharmaceutical companies that have moved into this space across many different disease indications. So that it's a very active area of research. And because of that, the medium and long-term perspective on the breadth of licensed products looks very promising. So at the moment, we really just have Sativex for spasticity in MS, THC for chemotherapy-induced nausea and wasting, and Epidiolex for epilepsy. So we've really just got 3 drugs for 3 areas. But if this phase 3 and phase 4 data is positive, we could see a much bigger breadth of licensed products being able to be prescribed by specialists in specialist conditions. And so that means also that the medium and long-term perspective on the general evidence base for cannabis-based medicines looks really promising, because the more that's done in this area, the more the clinical confidence will grow in the potential of cannabis-based medicines. And I think the more we'll start to personalize specific compounds or ratios of compounds or whole plant products, if that's appropriate, in different disorders. But what we need to do is start figuring out what is best for what disorders and how do we best give it to people. But the pharmaceutical industry is really helping to drive this increase in the general evidence base for cannabis-based products. And I suspect that if I was to be giving a module like this in a couple of years' time, that we'd have a lot more data to be able to put into it. Thank you.